poets have some very firm ideas about what an ending should do. Some poets feel like it should like click like a box. I think Dorian Locke said that. Other poets really want to resist such closure. They want to have the poem do something that opens up at the end. And I noticed in some of your poems, you have the poems start to build. They kind of swell at the end. The syntax even will sometimes change. It will elongate, there'll be more prepositional phrases, more clauses, like we can't come to a conclusion, and they almost move into positivity. Almost. And then there's like something happens off the page. There's this volta, and then the last line just boom, comes in and drops. And I wrote down just a couple of them that got me in particular. So in Grendel, that's some of my favorite, the two last lines. Bringing humans the best visions of themselves, line break, which of course must be slaughtered. Cocaine and Gold, that's another strong poem. That ends with, to hold your dying father up to a razor beneath the golden light and cut him finally in and out of the world. They rise and then they take us down. I'm just kind of curious, what are you wanting your endings to do?
That's a good question. I want them to feel organic, but simultaneously. So there's this like essay by this philosopher named George Agamben that says the end of a poem is actually the first place that the poem approaches prose. It approaches a type of syntactical meaning where like meaning we must at the end of a poem is where it comes to meaning. Right? It's been resisting meaning something through the whole poem, but when it comes towards the end, it has to mean. So I think about that. So I think of several things when I'm coming to an end of a poem, which is I kind of sometimes want to slam the door, sometimes I want to throw it open, and sometimes I want to like push down the wall and make you realize actually we thought we were in a building, but actually we're in the middle of a field. And so therefore it opens out. Right? Like I want many different types of endings, if that makes sense. So I'm looking for something that surprises me, or I want to come to a place of discovery. I want to really feel like I don't know what the end of a poem is. And generally when I'm starting, I really, really don't. And if I do, I start with the end. That is the beginning. Because what I want to find something. Because if I find something, you're going to find something. If I already know, if I'm bored, you're going to be bored. Right? So I'm always looking for the poem to, and I don't mean teach me, right, in this sort of pedagogical sense, but I'm looking to know something that I either didn't know I knew, or could have only known through writing the poem. And I feel like hopefully we get there by the end of the poem.
Oh yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about endings, right? I'm thinking about sometimes you close the door, sometimes you open it up, sometimes you're pushing things away, and suddenly you realize you're in a different space than you thought you were in the beginning. Like I think that poem by Frank O'Hara, that's about it's called The Day Lady Died. It's about Billie Holiday dying. And what you realize is he's doing everything but saying Billie Holiday died because it's so breaking him apart. So he talks about going to the store to buy cigarettes and sitting at this bar, and it's all about everything that's not Billie Holiday's death, right? So I think that's another way, right, into a poem, right, which is like, you know how, we all have family that do this, like people that won't talk about the issue at hand, but they talk all around it, or they like talk outside of it, and you know what they're really talking about is this thing over here. That's a mode of address.
That's right.
Right? That's an aesthetic sensibility. Right? We can occupy that as poets, right? We can think about that in ways. So, like, I think indirection, right, is a really useful tool because it intensifies what's not being looked at. Right? The more someone won't speak about something, the more you realize how much is bothering them. Right?
So, I think this is apparent with the poems you read tonight. You grew up in the church.
Very much so.
And so how, as a poet, how much is your sensibility affected by that?
Oh, incredibly shaped by. I mean, like I thought I was going to be a minister. I was like,
really?
Yeah, I was a youth minister. Like I gave sermons before the church at 16. So it's for a long while though, I ran from it in the sense of I didn't overtly use it in the first book as much. Partly because like when you wind up like going to college, you know, you're in English department and you like talk about like growing up reading the Bible. Like people look at you like you are crazy. Like you know, like it was just like no one even when I went to like a black school too. Like I went to Morehouse. Even that, it was like people didn't grow up like I grew up, right? And we, you know, we're all, but like I thought, oh, this is like I grew up kind of poor in like these like poor black churches where it's like we're meeting in people's garages and stuff, and so I just didn't see the value in that way totally because it just seemed so commonplace. But then as I started really like researching language and sort of being like in the ecstatic nature of language, I was like, oh no, this is actually like, should be mined, it should be used. And like I started thinking about like speaking in tongues as a form, right? Like in heteroglossia, right? or glossolalia, right? Thinking like that's what we call it in the academy, glossolalia, right? But you know, we grew up in the churches just speaking in tongues. And I started thinking about how that could be used to build a poem. And it's funny is, it was actually thinking about like secular music and the way in which a lot of secular music actually deploys a lot of things from like black church, like particularly like Stevie Wonder. He always gets caught up in the spirit at some point. Like he starts to be like, you know, it's like when you do like that, you know, but like, you know, the Holy Ghost, secular Holy Ghost. So yeah, the church, a prayer as a form, listening to my grandmother pray, listening to folks in church pray, and just thinking about like that as a form, particularly its improvisational nature. You know, James Baldwin, you know, I bring him up and I think about it. He really was delivering sermons in those essays, right? That's a sermonic essay, right? I think that's why it's so captivating, and it feels as if he's talking to you. So yeah, like it's huge.
Okay, I had a couple other things I wanted to ask. I'm going to cut it short, Seth. One other thing. So you have this new book coming out of essays. And you mentioned to me a little bit that one of the aspects you're interested in this book is looking at silence and how to use silence. Which I know is a little bit ironic to be talking about silence at a poetry reading when we're just talking. But still, I mean, it's such an interesting concept. But can you tell us anything about this new book and anything you want to share about it?
Yeah, the book, I didn't plan on writing a book of essays, y'all. But then the pandemic happened and I have more time. One of the things I'm really interested in is we're in an era, I would say we're in a gregarious, loquacious moment where we think speaking is the capital par excellence. And what I mean by that is speaking on Twitter, on Instagram, right? We all have to be like, I gotta tell you how I feel, right? But then I've been reading folks like this scholar and poet named Fred Moten and Stefano Harney. And they had this thing where they think about what if our speaking is actually further entrenching us in labor? Right, when I tell you, for instance, here's an example. They give us Twitter for free, right? We ain't got to pay for it, right? Unless we try to put up ads or something like that, right? But generally, how does Twitter function? It functions on us posting. So we're giving away, we're literally posting our thoughts, our feelings, right? And that allows for Twitter to mine those things, allows it to put up ads around it. So essentially, we are laboring for free for Twitter, right? And so one of the things that I think what winds up happening is we're in this moment of, we think going out and speaking against the state or against racism, and I think those are necessary, right? We need to charge up our senators and we need to run up on them as much as we can and demand certain things. However, that's not always effective. And when I started thinking about were these things called hush harbors. Has anybody ever heard this term before? A hush harbor was on the edges of plantations, sometimes in plantations, and what they were these zones where black folks would go to celebrate God or hatch plans for freedom. And what they would do is they would bend trees to point you in that direction. And the whole thing was to meet by a body of water and to speak desire over this body of water so it would hush the sound. And the whole goal was freedom could only be apprehended through this silence. Right? And these existed for hundreds of years, but there's very little record of it. So I wanted to start thinking about what happens if we bring back hush hush? What if we start to think about silence as a useful political strategy? What if we begin to think about like our freedom, the ways we want to be in the world, don't necessarily require us telling anybody, but maybe getting together with each other who know what that is and just being together. So it's about really sort of, I think too often I think because our feelings have become capital, our dispossession and our pain has become capital, we think that's the way we have to leverage it, right? That we have to speak it, we have to talk about it all the time. But I'm not sure that after I told you, like, this hurts, like, that stops the hurt. Right? Black people have been telling America that this is crazy for a long time. Right? Maybe it's actually the silence. Maybe there's something in the moving to the edges and to the margins and being okay at those spaces. So that's what one of the things it's looking at is silence in that way. And also I'm looking at one of the essays deals with the first Black cinematic kiss. I'm writing an essay, and it happens in a silent film in 1898. It's unlike anything you've ever seen before. It is not like any cinematic kiss before, and I explore how silence makes this kiss possible, and maybe the way silence can make other types of pleasures possible that we've been wanting. So,
great. Okay, we probably have time just for a couple of questions, and I really mean like two.
Please, if y'all, also we got a bookseller out here. She's been out, please give it up for the booksellers.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything you'd like to ask Roger Reeves? Go ahead, Jerome.
Ironically, Lisa, you mentioned about church and also silence and stuff. And as African American men, we have a tendency to hold things in and stuff and everything. And we have to be strong. But in the midst of me saying, midst of going through other issues and learning more about mental health, we understand that your voice needs to be heard, because if not, you will explode like a time bomb. Sure. So writing, in a sense, is so far as a tool, so you can sit here and get it out. Without sitting here, you can share with yourself. But when it comes to aesthetics and stuff and writing and stuff, you want to sit here and take it to another level. Right. And so forth is trying to put those problems that you conceal in yourself. How much of that do you have to sit here and put out there and without offending others?
Oh, how do I think about not offending others? Is I don't. How do I say this? I get worried at times because I know I'm gonna say something, but that's just the nature. I'm just trying to live my best life. You just gotta live your life, live your best. And so one of the things, I think trying to be where we want to be in terms of being able to express ourselves, we will offend people, right? I always tell them. I heard a professor at UT, fiction writer Elizabeth McCracken, says, if you write an essay or you're writing a short story, you shouldn't desire for it to offend no one. It should be offensive in the sense that people should take issue. It should take a side. It should take a stand. So I think often when we live our lives, we will ultimately offend someone when we're living just being ourselves in the selves that we believe we should be. So I worry about it because I'm mortal. But when I'm writing the poem, I always feel like the poem is stronger than I am. The poem is braver, it has more courage. And I can just get behind the poem. Right? And then I'm now behind the poem, and the poem is teaching me, and that helps me. So I really can't run it.
Okay. Go ahead in the back.
Your last poem about children and sense of pain and hurt in the beginning, and at the end, it seemed to grow until it reached this point in which it ended. My interpretation of the poem seems to reflect that children are growing up in this time that's very unknown. I mean, with the latest controversial topics, it's not what the world used to be, and it has gotten better in some stances, but not others. What is your take from that, and what were you trying to convey with that poem?
Good question. One of the things, this is going to be controversial.
Go for it.
I don't believe that there's safety. I don't believe safety really exists. And not particularly for black children or black people. I can be on this campus, sitting here, and if a police officer comes in and deems me in any way something, he can act upon that. That is my reality every day. I've had it happen in a university classroom where police officers come in and be like, while I'm teaching, right? So I say that, so when I'm thinking about children, I'm thinking about like what it is to raise a black girl child in America. And I don't believe I can teach her, like that poem, Rat Among the Pines, literally that happened. My daughter heard sirens because George Floyd had happened, and we had our own Mike Ramos, who was killed by the police, a man of color, Mexican and black man in Austin, in a protest during that time. And I take my daughter to protest. Even when she was 4, she's 7 now, so she's always gone. And I was trying to explain this to her because this is her reality. She is going to be raised as a black girl in America. And she heard the sirens. And she said to me, she was like, Daddy, are those sirens coming to kill us? And my answer was, I hope not. Because I can't tell her no. Because that's right, like I have to give her the complexity of what it is, right? Like, and it's not like giving her something that she can't handle, right? Because sometimes the world will make you handle some things. So I say that to think about the last poem. I think one of the things when I say you were never meant to be human, that to be playing a little bit in the idea that like black folks weren't human, right? We're 3 fish if we were anything at one point, right? And I don't know if I want to be human, right? If this is human, you know, y'all we can dismantle. Y'all can have this, right? Right? I don't need this human, right? And then you must be the grass. I think about the way, and this is a callback to women. I think about the way the grass always, like in vegetation, always takes back all types of human structures. Right? If you read like Ame Césaire, which is a Martinican poet who writes, who's surrealist, who talks about the vegetation being the thing that's sort of this symbolic representation of the subversion of colonialism. Right? So to me, in America, it's the grass. The grass grows over these structures. The grass grows out of the ribs of the dead. Right? And I think I want the children to grow wildly. Like I want them to be wild. It's actually the untamed which will find the future. Right? And so that's, even though like that's hard, you know, raising an untamed child is something. Sometimes you just want to be like, please do not sit on the dinner table. Like just put some clothes on. You can't be running around here with no clothes on. You're 7. You got to put some clothes on. You know, you try to, you know, but I'm trying to sort of engender this idea. And the thing is, I'm also talking to the children in us. Because that child is there. We are still sort of, we can be wild. We can be untamed. Right? And we need to be, because I think our future requires us to be more like the grass and less like what we think we are. That makes sense. Is that how?
That's beautiful. Well, we can continue these conversations over here at the book table. Roger, I just want to say just so deeply thank you for your